Hi and welcome to Rainey Dewey's Art Spot. This piece is a recovery piece. It started off as a demonstration piece in one of my art classes, and so I wanted to go back and take it back as far back as I could to get to the original source. I started this one with a graded wash, which means it's darker on the top than on the bottom, and so I won't be trying to produce any clouds in this one. So I ended up using a stiff bristle brush to remove as much of the unwanted trees as I could. You see there's still some shadows of what was, but we're going to do the best we can to try to take it back. So here, because I had to remove some of the trees as well as some of the sky color, I went in to try to reestablish some of the sky color. And that's a phthalo green shade. All of the paints used here are Core by Golden watercolors in tubes. And so you see I just did a very quick wash on the top, and then this I'm trying to establish some of the distant trees and bushes, and that mixture is a burnt sienna with ultramarine and a little bit of alizarin crimson or quinacridone magenta. Either one would do the job to take it away from being completely orange. You can see there I dropped in, I believe it was the quinacridone magenta. And so you'll see that in the reference photo, there's trees coming closer to us. The road takes a turn. It's all snow covered with some shadows coming from the right. Here I'm trying to take back some of the white of the snow, and so I'm using the stiff bristle brush there too. The paper is still pretty wet from that initial wash that I did on trying to remove some of the trees I didn't want. And here I'm trying to reestablish. I apologize for the focus of the camera. I did make an adjustment, so unfortunately it's focusing on my hand, and I do apologize for that. So here I'm just trying to reestablish some of the trees on both sides of the road. This is all done while the paper is drying. It's not completely saturated, but the paper is still fairly wet. Again, I'm sorry about that. I'm blotting some of those darker shades in those trees that I didn't want. Working back and forth. So sorry again for the video. I didn't want to leave any of it out just in case it's helpful. So here I'm bringing some values down, bringing the evergreen colors down. I'm referring to the photo reference as I go. I use a photo reference most of the time, although it's not going to be exactly like the photo. I like to have a source, especially, I find that especially important in the very beginning of learning to paint. In order to know your subject, you really need to use a source, whether you're working right on site in plein air, or if you have a still life set up or a photo reference, as in this case. It's important to know what you're painting. So I'm trying to establish some of the values along the bottom of the edge of the trees and brush. You'll always want to try to create a good value pattern. And then here I'm trying to establish some of the shorter grasses and trees that are infringing a little bit through the snow into the road. And laying in some of the trees. This is with a fine, one of the smaller round brushes. And the paper is still damp, but not wet. You can see that if it was wet, those small trees, those lines would be spreading. So the paper is fairly dry while I'm doing those trees. And now that the paper has dried a little bit in the foreground, I want to intensify some of the shadows in the snow, bring them all the way across the road, and try to just give them an interesting shape. It's always good to have something to look at. Once I land my first layer of shadows on the snow, the paper's wet, and then you can add more if you want to intensify the value. And here we go. Somebody had taken a little drive back there, so it left a wonderful track in the snow. That is such a great way to lead the viewer's eye also. It was right there in front of me, so I didn't have to create it, but having roadways and lines like that bring the viewer into your piece, always helpful. And so laying in some shadows and grasses. And here I'm trying to create some tree shapes just in that area that has been left. It's still a little bit green. There was an evergreen there when I first started, so I'm trying to cover that over. If I had done it right from the beginning, I would not have had a tree there, not an evergreen anyway. And so in a piece like this, you're really just trying to salvage it. I try not to just give up and throw it away. I try to push it these days as far as I can, so I get something that's okay, that's good, but not great, but still, I didn't quit on it, and I learned something while I did it. And that's the main goal, is to just keep trying. Here I'm trying to create that little tree line in the middle, in the distance. That I'm using a gray, which is ultramarine and burnt sienna. Anytime you need to create a gray, you go to opposites on the color wheel. So blue and orange are color complements, and when you mix that in equal parts, you end up with a gray. If you want to push it in one direction, you use more ultramarine, it leans toward the blue. And if you wanted it to be more orange, you would use more burnt sienna. And so it tends to be a nice, flexible color to use. And then, of course, sometimes I use it with alizarin crimson, and then today I used quinacridone magenta instead. It adds a little red to it, and that you can take it toward the purple, and it's just a versatile combination of colors to use in a winter landscape. And here I'm trying to paint some of those distant trees. You can see in the middle, in the very distance, there's, I don't know if they're poplars or I don't think they're birches, but they're a very, very light tree. And so I'm doing a little bit of negative painting. So I'm painting around some of the, I'm darkening some of the surface around little bits of the tree. And that's called negative painting. And so here, this is just mostly dry paper, and I'm fine-tuning the details with mostly dry paper, and that gives you a lot of control. I like to use this type of process where you use washes in the very beginning to establish your basic values, and then you go in and you do controlled washes throughout the painting, and then at the very end you do these, you can do these dark, bring in some dark values to give it a lot of interest. So I'm going to let you finish watching, and please, if you have any questions, let me know. If you're doing a piece like this yourself, I'd love to see it. So paint on. Don't give up and paint on.